All right, we are live.
Nice.
Peter, welcome to the live broadcast. As people kind of begin sort of trickling in here, we're gonna be talking about some of the themes from the episode that we didn't get to explore as much. And actually, our original conversation was almost double in length of the actual episode that we aired, and so there was a number of topics that we didn't get to really go into, and I think one of the most important topics was measurement and how important measurement is for personal growth, and the quantified self movement's obviously a tremendous example of that. Hey everybody, what's going on in chat? Tyler, how you doing? Yabka, how you doing? Pakistan, that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Yeah. So Peter, do you want to kind of dive in as people are kind of coming on and joining the live Q&A? Do you want to tell a little bit about measurement and why that's so important, and what the science kind of says about that?
Yeah. So in the interview that we recorded, I think we mainly kind of chatted about accountability, and that's something that I've done a lot of research around. It's something that we've really looked at as this kind of thing that moves the needle for all sorts of people from all kind of walks of life in terms of finally taking action on the things that they know they should. Humans are complex though, so the more in-depth conversation that we didn't get to have on the interview is that anytime anybody boils down all of human motivation to one single thing, they're always committing a sort of a scientific travesty, right? So anyone who tells you everything in life is all about sex, or all motivation is all about accountability, there's definitely other dynamics. And I would say that I think accountability is one of the biggest motivators. It's one of, just because of the sheer kind of emotional power of our sort of mammalian brain and the power of social structure and support. But the second thing is what drives the quantified self movement. It's the reason that these things, the Apple Watch, sell so well and actually work so well. And it's just the idea of measurement. The thing about taking action on trying to move things ahead in our lives, whether it's the simple goal, I think everyone can relate to, of like trying to get in the best shape of your life, whether you're trying to like bulk up in the gym or lose a couple pounds or whatever it is. Or for like executives who are trying to kind of push deals and work on projects, maybe close sales, that sort of stuff. The thing about taking action is that the human brain likes really short feedback loops, right? So we like to be able to, like, what's highly motivating for humans is to be able to invest energy and focus and our willpower into some kind of a challenge, some kind of a problem to solve, and then immediately see a result, like see a little incremental reward for our effort. And that's part of why, I know this is a passion of yours, it's part of why video games are so emotionally
Yeah,
compelling
totally.
and powerful, because video games take the complexities and the long journeys of delayed gratification that we go on in our regular lives, and they shorten them down to these tiny little challenges, right? It's like beat the dungeon, takes 20 minutes, navigate your character through the puzzle, apply your willpower, and then you get that reward. You unlock that piece of equipment or like whatever it is, and suddenly you feel like you've closed that gap and you've kind of mentally closed the loop. So the thing about measurement is that measurement can actually form a sort of a meta game of incremental loop closing and mental reward for the goal of improving ourselves and trying to better our lives that require months or years. Like, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and if you want to lose 10 pounds, you have to eat healthy and exercise for 3 or 4 weeks before you're going to notice any measurable body change whatsoever, before your belt feels a little looser, before you step on a scale and really see any difference. If you're a business owner, if you're trying to do something like that, if you're working on some goal in your career, it could be 6 to 12 months before you see any kind of result. So bringing in kind of gamification of measurement and creating proximal goals that we track and measure and move our way towards kind of before we get those big long-term outcomes is a way to hack the human mind and essentially make it kind of fun to take the action in the short term, even though you're working on this much longer term project.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and before I kind of get back, and respond to that, I just want to say welcome to everybody who's here. I see another person from Silicon Valley. How you doing? That's very exciting. I think Pakistan still has the record for furthest away listener. Michael, what's up, man? How you doing? That's really funny. but yeah, so I mean, coming back to this idea of measurement, and video games is a great example, right? I mean, I'm a huge video game nerd and video game player, and I definitely get kind of sucked into that desire and that system of wanting to level up, wanting to just get that next type of thing, wanting to go to that next level. And to me, you know, one of the epiphanies I had when I was probably 18 or 19. What's up, Karen? How you doing from New York? I used to live there. Fun fact.
I'm sitting there right
Yeah,
now.
Peter lives there still. Um, so anyway, I lost my train of thought for a second, but the whole idea is like I had this epiphany when I was like 18 or 19, kind of in college, that I was like, oh my god, life is a video game, basically, right? And I kind of thought, you know, I'm a big RPG player, and I thought about like, oh well, myself, basically, I have a character sheet, right? And I can sort of level up my stats, and I sort of started conceiving of my resume as a character sheet and figuring out how can I sort of level up these different pieces. And I think that brought my that sort of took that measurement that's so powerful and contextualized it back into these sort of medium term goals in my life. You know, oh, can I get an internship this summer and add something else to my resume? And so I think that was really powerful tool, and it's just a small example of why measurement is so important.
One of that totally. This is one of the things that we observed amongst ultra high performers, people who are incredibly high leverage in terms of their, their earning potential, just the level at which they're playing life in all kinds of ways. Uh, and a lot of kind of concrete metrics that show, high performance, upward mobility, that kind of thing. What we noticed about these people is that they intuitively seem to kind of play this game of meta measurement in every aspect of their lives. And there's, one of the anecdotes that I like to tell, and I'm actually not 100% sure how real or truthful this anecdote is, but it's one that's thrown around all over the place. It's about Jerry Seinfeld and how he kind of got started in his career, because he basically realized, and a lot of creative people can relate to this, that if you're trying to push any kind of creative career or endeavor, there's a huge amount of kind of sharpening the saw, right? Like honing the craft, getting good at what
Yeah,
you do
absolutely.
before you start to kind of, enjoy any kind of success or be recognized or anything like that. So there's this sort of legend about Seinfeld, which he may or may not have confirmed, which is that for years at the early stages of his career, he kept a wall calendar just with like individual like 30 boxes on it each month. And every single day he would make himself write a joke, kind of Stephen King style, like rain or shine, no matter what happened, he would have to come up with an original joke. They could be crappy, they could be great, but the important thing was the consistency. And so what he started doing was checking off on this wall calendar for every single day that he did it, creating this super simplistic game of meta measurement. And after doing this consistently for a week, he kind of felt good about the streak and wanted to keep it going for another week. And then it was like, got to finish the month. And then it's like, can't stop now, got to keep going. So the crazy thing is this tactic that essentially is like a fridge like monitor that a parent might give their 12-year-old kid to like teach them how to empty the dishwasher or take out the trash or something like that, is actually a highly effective way for willing adults to actually kind of hack their mind and take something that would otherwise be kind of unrewarding, right? Like if you're in day 276 out of a 10-year spell of writing jokes that nobody's going to read, it's really easy to lose sight of the big picture, or rather to see how far away that ultimate destination is. And so that's the psychological power of measurement, is essentially in creating these kind of proximal rewards that the human body can actually enjoy, that the human brain can enjoy, that serve as proxies for the ultimate accomplishment that we want to have happen. And what the neurology research shows us about this is that these games of measurement, even when they're totally artificial and constructed in a lab, right, where like some participants in a study will be given puzzle to solve and that kind of thing, and then all of a sudden the researcher just says, all right, we're keeping track now, you've done one, now you've done two, or whatever, all of a sudden the reward center in the brain starts to be activated. There's something that we like about taking the world and breaking it down into little bits and pieces and little chunks. And so this is a game-changing thing to think about when it comes to, how it is that we're setting goals for ourselves. What we found is that 90% of the people we talk to who just want productive, want to be taking more action in most important goals.
So before we kind of get into the next bit of that, obviously we have listeners on here, and this was sort of exclusively broadcast just to our email subscribers and just to the most interested and active listeners. And so we're super excited to have you guys on here to be able to actually interact with Peter and ask him questions in real time. And so Peter and I can go on and talk about measurement. We could talk about conscientiousness, which is another big kind of topic that we didn't quite get as deep into as I wanted to in our interview. We just ran out of time. But we have this special forum set up. This is obviously a unique episode, and we have this special forum set up so that you have an opportunity to ask Peter questions. I can ask Peter questions whenever I want. You know what I mean? And so I want to encourage you to bring questions and ask him. If you want to ask him about things we talked about in the interview, if you've had a chance to listen to it, if you want to ask him about or ask us about Science of Action, we can definitely dig into that. And we're super excited to be launching that and really really pumped. And it ties into all of these kind of themes that we've been talking about, and really leverages the science behind what makes people take action and be effective, and kind of brings that to helping people achieve the results they want in their lives. And so you know I would encourage you in the chat. Obviously we have the chat and we can kind of see what's going on in there. So if you have questions for me or for Peter or about Science of Action, about the interview, etc., just type them in the chat and we'll get to addressing them.
Cool.
But as we'll sort of let those questions accrue, Peter, coming back to this idea of measurement and it's sort of, having something every day, I found that so true for me personally. And, even we've talked about this kind of creativity ritual that I have where every morning I will sort of brainstorm ideas or work on my creativity. And that having sort of just a little something that you talked about with Seinfeld, where I sort of check the box every day that I execute that makes me feel awesome. You know what I mean? And I have another one that this probably doesn't surprise many listeners, but I have basically a daily kind of learning goal that I spend an hour a day on learning, whether that's reading a new book or whether that's, watching YouTube videos, whether that's kind of creating a mind map or a summary or review notes for something that I've already learned so that I can continue to kind of keep that top of mind. And just every single day when I check the box on that, when I check the box on the creativity ritual, I feel like I feel like I'm like kicking ass and accomplishing stuff, even if I haven't done anything else.
Totally. And I think that daily measurement, like the building of simple kind of daily routines, is really significant. I personally create a lot of content, so I do a lot of writing as the shrink for entrepreneurs. I've been blogging for years, and I'm constantly putting out stuff. So for me, it's 500 words 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. That's like a daily
That.
kind of a measurement that I check off. And I've been doing it kind of on and off for years. Every time I fall off the bandwagon, I deeply regret it. And so it just keeps coming back as this really significant thing. The other thing that I think is really important is thinking about, the projects that are a little harder to measure, right? Like the things that we're working on to improve ourselves that don't fit into a daily routine, that require, and we certainly see this with like executives that we talk to, entrepreneurs, people who are working on these kind of big abstract projects, that figuring out those proximal steps, that asking that question of where you want to be, in 7 days versus just with the, just what that long-term 6-month outcome is. These types of questions are so deeply important to ask. And the problem is that most people kind of understand the spirit of goal setting, right? They've heard that it's a good thing. They decide, okay, I want that. I'm going to put it out in the future. That's the thing I'm aiming for a year from now, whatever. But actually having these proximal steps that you move towards, it's something that's counterintuitive to a lot of people. They don't automatically kind of think about it. And the problem is that as you're executing, when you're working on a project and you don't have some form of meta measurement in place, you haven't set that up with yourself, with some source of accountability, however you want to do it. The issue is that most humans will default to asking the kind of lowest leverage form of self-measurement, which is basically asking themselves, do I feel really busy? Do I feel like I'm working really hard on this? And the problem is that there's a lot of things that we try to accomplish in our lives where hard work isn't necessarily, like, just kind of sweat and effort isn't necessarily the biggest indicator for success. That's certainly true, like, in all realms of professional performance in the business world, but it's even true with some kinds of like one of the things that a lot of this like research around health that's coming out is showing that, people create much more sustainable habits when they have this like very specific workout regime that's usually on the smaller side. And so a lot of times people will just feel frustrated and put in a ton of work because the only thing they know how to measure is how much does it hurt today. And this creates this cycle of kind of burning out burning out and not really measuring the right things. And ultimately kind of getting to people who clock crazy hours, put crazy sweat and effort into their goals on one day. And then the next day will kind of that pendulum swings back and they do absolutely nothing. So it looks like we're getting a couple questions in here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
So, do we want to kind of just knock them out one by one, or is there one in particular that you think could kind of be the most instructive for everybody listening?
Let's take a look here. So we've got Yabka from Pakistan who's asking about struggling with productivity and time management. I hope you can give me some good suggestions. It's a pretty wide open question, Yabka. We can definitely the first thing to do is hit the episode that Matt and I just recorded that we posted this morning, or that Matt published this morning. We've got a lot of cool stuff in there that's going to be super relevant for anyone, no matter what you're working on.
Yeah, so I think let's dig into Ravi's question actually, and we'll come back to these others as well. But Ravi's question I think is really good, which is this idea of social isolation, and isn't it a difficult problem to eradicate? Peter, how do you think about how sort of isolation, and because obviously we talk about how isolation undermines accountability, and how we live in sort of this isolated world today where it's hard to measure our productivity and really see if we're actually creating results or not. And even the people closest to us in our lives don't really know if we're being effective or working or not. And so,
Yeah.
how do we kind of solve that isolation, and what's the factor that can enable us to do that?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Thanks, Ravi. That's a great one. So, and Ravi's kind of right in a way that there is some gravity to social isolation. I mean, part of the reason that people struggle with social isolation that creates a lack of accountability, that prevents them moving from learning to doing, as we talked about in the episode, is literally what we're doing right now. Like, there's a group of people here live on watching this YouTube feed who are all deeply, deeply, like, you guys are the most committed, the most interested in personal growth. You're super keen subscribers to Science of Success, and you're having this kind of like, look around you, look around the computer, wherever you're accessing this experience in. The reality is that the internet and modern technology, everything from the microprocessor on, are very double-edged swords, right? They're incredibly powerful because we have more access to information than we ever had. Like, our ability to just suck in this like valuable deep learning from people like Matt, from people like the guests on your podcast, it's unparalleled in human history. At the same time, though, there's a really kind of deep problem, which is that when we try to move from learning into doing, we step back from our devices and realize that this experience, even the epiphanies that we're having, like this amazing learning, has been happening in total isolation. There's no one to talk to about what we actually plan to do with it. And so, yeah, there is to answer Ravi's question, there is real gravity against that, because the more we go down these rabbit holes, the more we self-educate, particularly leveraging the internet and technology, the more isolated we become. And that's, I think, really the reason for our whole episode, why we recorded that interview, was to really kind of beat the drum of the power of seeking out objective accountability. And I think that if anyone's watching this, Ravi, you in particular, if you've gone on a journey of kind of committing more and more time, Matt just talked about an hour a day dedicated to learning. I want to propose that you take some time every day to seek out community that's dedicated to doing. Right? To go out and try to find that connection. We recommend at my company, where we pair people up with these executive aids for effectiveness. We actually provide an accountability service. We tell all of our customers, don't stop at this. Don't let this be the only accountability lifeline you have. Go and create the mastermind group. Get on meetup.com and create personal development, like whatever town or area or city that you live in. If it doesn't already exist, you might be surprised that there's already people out there who are meeting. And it's so crucial that we build, like, that humans return to the strong social net ties that we had for thousands of years that have only kind of gone away in the last 50 to 70 years.
And I think, Peter and I obviously, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Robbie, that this whole idea that without social, the right kind of social infrastructure and when we're isolated, we lose accountability in our lives. And so with Science of Action, we've tried to create some sort of pillar of support that's going to enable you to create that accountability, literally having essentially sort of a professionally trained accountability buddy who's going to hold you accountable to your goals and help you sort of prioritize and focus and figure out what's important and what you should actually be spending your time on so that you don't have to use the brain power and the willpower to kind of constantly fight that battle and constantly be sort of racking your brain about, I don't know if this is the right thing, I don't know if this is the right thing, and you can be overwhelmed and not be able to figure out what to do and get stuck in a place of non-doing or not executing. And so, there's obviously, as Peter said, there's a lot of solutions, and I think it's not just one thing, but that's why we've created Science of Action, because we think it could be a meaningful tool and a meaningful strategy and kind of a nice thing in your tool belt to help you be able to execute more, take more action, and solve to some degree that isolation problem. But it doesn't just start and end with that. I think, as Peter said, it's a much broader strategy.
When I go and speak at conferences, I have this slide that I use in some of my talks where I talk about the power of accountability, and I present it like bricks in a wall that you're kind of building up, like a structure, a kind of a pillar, a fortress. And and we literally label the bricks as like friends, mentors, mastermind groups, like coffee clubs, all of the different things. We just kind of put professional objective accountability as the top brick. That's really kind of the ultimate kind of layer to add to the top. But we heartily recommend that everybody make it a kind of a super critical project in their lives to start assembling and stacking those bricks of accountability up in their own lives and in their own minds. It's the ultimate project because it makes every other project that much more effective. It's kind of the gift that keeps on giving in that respect.
And I think that comes back to Hax's question as well. That when you're trying, and to some degree your question, Yabko. I think all of these are kind of wrapped up in the same idea, which is, how do we stay motivated? How do we find the time to kind of execute? And I think it comes back to the reason that you lose motivation, that you don't constantly stay in a state of execution. And as we talk about in the interview, it's not something you can learn. It's sort of a state or a presence that requires a posture. That's the term, a posture that requires energy to maintain, right? And so to be in that posture is requires constant refreshment and reinforcement and the support to be able to stay in that place. And so, again, that's why we thought about Science of Action as a solution for this, because we want to be able to offer people the ability to stay in that posture. And I know for me personally, working with Peter has been a huge pillar of staying in the posture of doing and executing. And even today, I mean, I think I constantly will fall into, spits and starts and places of not execution, but I've become more and more and more consistent in my ability to execute throughout my life and through using these tools. And so it comes back to, it's kind of like a chain of logic here, right? If you want to stay motivated and you want to execute, the answer to that is unquestionably accountability, right? And then there's a ton of science around that, and we can get into like conscientiousness and the ocean study and all this kind of stuff, the marshmallow test, all these things. But accountability helps you stay motivated, helps you execute what you want to execute on. And so we've tried to say, okay, we know accountability is a major factor that not only helps people execute, but it's also essentially missing in large chunks of our society. And that's what we're talking about with the question that Ravi raised. And so we've tried to create some sort of solution to that using Science of Action. And so the combination of kind of these effectiveness aids that are going to help you stay accountable, essentially be your accountability buddy, and make sure you're executing every single week, checking in with you, holding to your goals, and helping you pick and prioritize the most effective ones. Um, and I think, combined with everything else, it's a great sort of solution and strategy. But I don't want to spend too much time riffing on that. Um, sorry, I was just looking at the other questions. I don't want to spend too much time riffing on that, but I want to get into and make sure we can talk about kind of the other things that we have on here.
I think there's a really cool question, a good question from Hacks433, which is, do either of you have any advice for sticking with goals, i.e. keeping motivation consistent? And I can kind of, I think that question of consistency is really important, and I can kind of speak to that a little bit. One of the things that we see a lot of, that I've seen a lot of over the years, is people who set ambitious projects that are, ambitious but realistic projects that are the kind of thing that they should be able to do. But the challenge being that everything worth accomplishing in life, the really juicy goals that we set, tend to be the ones that take a little bit, longer to accomplish, right? That some of the most meaningful goals aren't things that we can turn around in a week. They require months of time in some cases to really see them be accomplished, or several weeks. Now, the challenge is that a lot of people, when they set a goal, there's an initial kind of excitement. They get fired up because they've got a new intention and they start going out in that direction. A lot of people get close, as they get close to finishing a goal, that part's easy because they can feel that loop that we were talking about when we were discussing measurement being about to be closed. The middle part is really challenging, and I think that one of the biggest ways to kind of solve that middle problem and keep the consistency going is to actually be engaging in like a planning methodology on a weekly basis, where you're basically breaking down your implementation intentions and you're finding the right level of implementation granularity, not for the entire goal itself, but for the week that's in front of you, so that you're adjusting, because every single one of your goals, you have to fit into your regular life. You have to fit into everything else, your responsibilities, other commitments to your work, to your family, to whatever else you've got going on. And so having this kind of on the fly planning ritual that says, this week, what am I moving forward? What balls am I picking up and kind of carrying down the field when it comes to this project of improvement, this thing that I'm trying to make happen in my life? And that planning methodology being like a fluid and evolving process is super important. It sounds so intuitive. And I know that whenever we talk about like evidence-based solutions to problems of procrastination and self-sabotage, it sort of sounds deeply unsexy. But the grim truth is that most people don't come close to doing any of this stuff. Most people set a goal and say, I'm gonna crush 20 hours a week on this project because they have 20 hours that week. But then a month later, life gets in the way, things starts happening. I mean, how many people in our live audience can relate to that, having a big intention and then feeling as though urgencies and busynesses and different kind of priorities start competing for it like a week or two later? And the problem with that is that we're not adjusting on the fly. We're not thinking about what the psychologists in the space call ideal implementation granularity, which is the sort of rate at which you're basically breaking down your tasks and moving forward on them on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. So, that's obviously, we're talking a lot today about science of action, this new collaboration between Matt and I, and that's a big part of what the actual methodology of our executive effectiveness aids really is that their job is to be like a project manager where the project is you.
Yeah, and I think
the project is you and you. And so they actually... Sorry, Matt.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. My thing paused and I thought you were done talking.
Oh, yeah. It's cutting in and out sometimes when you're talking too. Yeah. So basically having this kind of on the fly adjustment to the demands of your life week to week, and being able to kind of adjust the granularity of your goal progress and what you're taking action on is super critical. And it results in consistent motivation because you are slightly shifting and adjusting the goalposts in a realistic way. The opposite of this is sticking to your big audacious plan, having other things compete and take away time, and then ultimately becoming discouraged because you don't feel like you're moving forward at the rate you originally said you would. And we see that as a form of self-sabotage all the time.
Yeah, I think that's much more prevalent and common. And I mean, it reminds me of the Zig Ziglar kind of parable. It's one of my favorites that, he talks about how someone says, oh, I'm going to get started, but I can't get started now because it's summertime and the kids just got out of school. And he tells this whole, like 5-minute story, and it comes back. It's like the whole year. And there's always a reason. There's always an excuse why it hasn't happened this month, right? It's like, oh, I got to go, I want to go fishing, blah, blah, blah. And then finally it comes back to, well, I get too busy because his kids are in school. And then like the year fully comes back around and they still haven't taken any action, right? And so I think you're dead on that. A lot of times it's hard for people to kind of even to some degree get out of the starting gate and really take the first steps towards taking this action. And we set all the, without clarity of our goals and sort of granularity of what the right level to implement them is, we get lost. And so, that comes back to the second sort of follow-up question that you've asked, Ravi, which is this idea of tying goals to your long-term vision, right? I think that the correct strategy for doing that, I mean, one, I don't see why you would pursue a goal that's not in line with your long-term vision, but that's kind of a whole nother can of worms. But having the right implementation granularity is a critical component of doing that. And it's helpful sometimes to kind of get outside perspective, which has been my relationship with Peter on what am I doing. It's sometimes just holding a mirror up to ourselves. It's hard to kind of see what the best course of action is when you're in the middle of it, right? And if the flip side is, like, if a friend comes to you for advice, it's really easy to see, oh, well, you should do this. Obviously, like, you're hung up on this and blah blah. But it's so hard to see it in our own lives, and so hard to see it in our own kind of priorities and struggles. And so, having sort of a mirror that you can hold up to yourselves is a tremendously valuable tool and strategy to be able to do that.
Yeah. Now I want to answer, I totally agree. I want to quickly hit Tyler's question because he answered a good question about our long-term plans for the science of action. And I don't want him to feel like we passed over that question.
We didn't forget you, Tyler.
Yeah, we didn't forget. So what did he say here? Tyler, bringing up the systems of measurement you've been talking about, do you intend to implement those analytics in app form? That's a great question. Super stoked that you asked it. So the software application that powers Science of Action was built by me and my team, and it's a work in progress. We've been, we publish kind of updates and iterations to it regularly. We actually have what we've really built is a gamification of the game of productivity itself. So the point of the software is to act partially as a project planning tool for Project U to kind of keep track of all the tasks and goals and hopes and dreams that you have that you want to work on, that you want to be held accountable to, especially. But the other thing is that it tracks it tracks your reporting on what it is that you're actually getting done week to week, and helps you build streaks of following through on the intentions that you're setting. So the process of working with one of the executive aides with Science of Action is a process of actually strategizing with this helper, going through this methodology on a weekly basis to set and clarified, specific, intentional goals, making commitments to yourself that you're then held in terms of accountability for. And the app measures your follow through on those as well. So we've actually built measurement into what we're doing. We're always looking to add more of it. And we certainly have other features kind of coming online. But right out of the gate, as you start to, well, not right out of the gate, because you've got to get in and start taking some action. But after a couple of weeks, you're going to start to see these records build up of how you've been performing based on the goals you're setting for yourself over time. And so we actually visually track some of that information in the app, which I think is a really significant feature. So hopefully that answers your question, Tyler. Keep them coming, guys. Keep on writing these down.
Yeah, so I'll hop in as well and say, obviously we've got some new people who've joined, and for those of you who haven't had a chance to say hi in the chat, tell us where you're from, and also let us know what questions you have. We're here to answer your questions and dig into whatever you guys want to talk about. So I have a number of things I could continue to ask Peter about, and we also have a number of questions that listeners emailed in that we can kind of get to. But I'd love to prioritize the people who are here live right now and really focus on what you guys want to talk about.
So we got a quick follow-up question from Tyler, which was, is there a sweet spot for setting the length of a goal? I honestly think that the answer for this one is simple. I don't think that there necessarily is. It depends really on what it is that you're working towards. You mentioned, Tyler, in the comments that the Whole30 works for you because of the 30-day focus. I totally agree. That type of like short-term goal can be really compelling. Types of goals to remember that the ultimate objective that you're after, right? It's not about completing the Whole30 diet. It's about creating some kind of transformation in terms of your health. And so that goal is much more of a longer term one, and it's something that needs to be ritualized and also be kind of granular and day to day. So I don't think that there's any right way to think about it, but I think that experimenting with what works for you as an individual in terms of time frame is ideal. And I think that I actually think that there's a long history for human beings in the 7-day week, that it works quite well for us to think about what we're going to be focusing on in the next 5 to 7 days. That seems to be a pretty solid a solid sort of granularity of time for people to kind of break down very specific implementation plans. Beyond that, your mileage may vary. It really depends on you, the goal that you're working on, and how your brain works.
Yeah, and I'll echo that as well. I mean, I think for me personally, I like to kind of I keep my goals in kind of two different buckets. I have these sort of medium to long-term projects, and then every single week I'll review that kind of list of medium to long-term projects and outcomes that I want to create, and I'll pull forth what are the sort of action items that I can execute on in the next, 5 to 7 days. And my work with Peter has really helped me not only sort of determine which one of those outcomes I should be prioritizing in a given week, but also try to determine, how do I execute on these, and how do I keep myself accountable to making sure that I'm actually implementing these various things. And so when you're in the trenches kind of day to day, it's much harder to kind of see the forest for the trees. But that's why I kind of once a week like to touch back in. And I think with my long-term goals, and I think this kind of comes back to what you were talking about, Ravi, you want to have sort of a little bit of both, right? And so if you don't come back and connect with the long-term vision every now and then, and your goals kind of stray from that, I think you got to look and figure out, why are you executing something that doesn't line up with your long-term vision and where you ultimately want to be headed.
Right on. Yeah. Another great follow-up question from Hacks433. I've been hearing a lot about experimentation for figuring out what works for you. Any advice on how to experiment or how you guys go about it? My thought is to start small. That's certainly what we've always done. With our executive aid team, that we always start. We like to build positive track records and streaks. So we'll start with like 7-day objectives. We'll start on the smaller side. We always encourage our clients, like, let's set a goal that we can overachieve, and then very quickly, like that next week, we'll step it up to the next level and make whatever the objective is, whether it's professional, health focus, personal relationships, some kind of spiritual practice. We might make it even bigger and sort of arrive at that sweet spot. We don't try to overshoot, we try to undershoot and get there in a positive way, so that there's not resentment, frustration, and bitterness on behalf of the person who's trying to get the goal done. So I think experimenting by starting small and kind of ratcheting it up. Remember, you've got a whole lifetime in front of you in order to kind of make these things happen. So set a small goal today, double it tomorrow, double it again the next day. You'll very quickly arrive at that sweet spot with whatever it is that you're working on. So that's a cool question, Mr. Hacks433. Thank you for asking it.
And yeah, so I'll touch on that as well, because I think it is really important. And we talked about how the quantified self movement is huge, and what the implications are of that for the importance of measurement. And so, in my own life, I constantly am running, a half dozen experiments, and I'll kind of test them out for a little while, see how things are working, see if I'm getting the results that I want, and then I'll come back and sort of determine, okay, is this creating the things that I want, or is this a waste of time, or is it distracting me, or whatever? And this is one of the things that we'll get into in the first Science of Action webinar, which is the 80/20 principle and how to apply that to your life. But I think that I routinely, between sort of once a month and once a quarter, I will sit down and spend a couple hours and look at my life, everything from how I've spent my time. I'll do a sort of a week by week, day by day review of my calendar, how, projects I'm working on, everything, and figure out, okay, what's working and what's not working, right? And I think that having that sort of ritualized contemplative routine, as the research would call it, to enable yourself to kind of pull back, look at your life, and look at what's going on from 30,000 feet, gives you the opportunity to kind of weed out the experiments that aren't working, and gives you the flexibility to test and try new experiments. So I would say, give it a shot. Figure out the lowest risk, easiest way to sort of just try it out for a week or a couple days, or a month, or whatever the sort of appropriate time frame for that particular challenge is, and then go back and reflect on it, and look at it and figure it out. Because I think what's missing a lot of times from our daily lives is everyone's so reactive. They're constantly caught up in email and social media, and all of this kind of stuff. The reflection gets lost. And that's, if there's one theme that comes up again and again and again and again on the science of success, it's the importance of reflection. It's the importance of journaling, meditation, again, these ideas of contemplative routines, and stepping out of the day-to-day noise and the busyness. And so, that's the first topic, the very first month for the Science of Action webinar component, which goes along with the executive effectiveness aids. That's what we're going to be diving into, is how you can build those in your life, talking about how I've built them into my life, and sharing sort of routines, templates, and strategies that enable people to actually that literally giving you the worksheets of here's how I do an 80/20 analysis so that you can implement them as well. So we'll look at the questions now. Let's see. And again, as new people are kind of coming and joining, I know these live streams, sometimes people have to go, sometimes we get new people right in the middle. So if you have questions, definitely ask us, shoot them in there. This is a unique opportunity to engage with one of our guests from the show, Peter Shallard, and I'd love for you to ask him anything. And anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak up, definitely throw it out there. But Hax and Yabka and Tyler and Robbie have all been really kind of hammering us with questions, and so we're going to keep giving them a bunch of answers to their life problems, unless you guys want to dig in as well.
Right. Looks like Hax digs that answer. We've got some good ones here. Ravi's asking a cool question about the science behind. Is there science about how to build optimism in a more structured way? I mean, one of the things that I've seen in our work. I mean, at this point, we've held accountability for is that it's a lot easier to be it's a lot easier to be optimistic when you're winning. So that's, I think, just to stress the kind of the philosophy that we have with the executive aid methodology that we've built in everything that we do, is that we always want to build positive streaks. We always want to kind of aim low and get that track record of success initially before we start ratcheting up the size, the ambition of the goals that someone's focusing on. And I highly recommend you doing the same, because setting enormous goals that you then fall short of is really depleting when it comes to optimism. And accomplishing even small things, right? Like even those little kind of like minor, it's the reason why, Matt, I don't know if you remember this. I haven't actually done it myself, but is it Couch to 5K? Is that the name of the program? There's like a running like philosophy or something that have you heard of? And
I've heard of it, but I'm definitely not a runner.
Me either. But the reason that it works, though, it's really successful, is that literally on the first day, I think it has you get up and run like 50 or 100 meters, right?
Yeah,
like
I'm laughably small.
Something laughably small. Yeah, I'm from New Zealand, so I talk in metric. But yeah, so it's like just a few 100 feet and or something. I don't know. And then you just ratchet up from there, and that really creates that optimism and that motivational fuel, because it's like you know that you did it yesterday. You feel that confidence that you made something happen, that you bridge that gap into doing. And then you know that comparably to what you accomplished already, the next challenge is only like incrementally a little bit bigger. And I think that that's really important. I mean, it's one of the biggest things our aides wrestle with is the clients they work with getting excited to start the service. And on day one, their first call, the check-in phone conversation, phone consult with the aide, they're thinking, how can I go massive? How do I knock this out of the park? And it's the job of our team to reel those people back in and say, okay, let's get some solid implementations in place for this next week, and then we'll see how we go, and maybe go a little bit bigger, because it works. It's unsexy, but it works.
Yeah, I think Peter pretty much nailed it, and Tyler kind of just briefly mentioned 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I think that's such an important book. And to me, one of the most important concepts from that is this notion of urgent versus important, right? And that kind of 4 quadrant grid of urgency and importance. And I think we spend so much of our time and so much of our lives living on the urgent side of the equation, when you actually think about it and really look at it and spend the time reflecting and contemplating and thinking and sort of analyzing what's producing results in your life, you'll discover that almost all of the results and the big impacts that you really want to focus on take place in that important but not urgent bucket, right? And it's so hard to actually carve out the time, the focus, the motivation to do those things that are vitally important but not necessarily urgent. And that's exactly, what we've set out to do with Science of Action. And I've been able to execute on things that are important but not urgent in my life as a result of creating accountability, as a result of having someone who actually holds me accountable, checks in with me, makes sure that I'm executing on these things. And we wanted to be able to share that and sort of create an opportunity to bring that to everybody else who's here. So I wanted to just also give kind of a brief 10-minute warning. So we're doing we're going to be live for 10 more minutes. So if you have your questions, get them in now. We'll kind of try to do a little bit of a rapid fire and hit everybody's things so that we have time to kind of cover everyone. But again, we got 10 more minutes. If you have questions, definitely shoot them into the chat. It should be kind of on the bottom right corner of your screen. And I wanted to also hit briefly on this question from Andrew Marcus. Andrew, great question. And I think rest and recovery are tremendously important. I'm a huge believer in that. And if you look at everybody from Josh Waitzkin, who's one of my all-time favorite kind of thinkers about performance and learning, to Michael Gervais, who we've had on the show twice, when you look at these people who work with the world's top performers, they talk again and again about how vital rest and recovery is to ultimate peak performance. And so there's no question that that's a tremendously important factor, and it's key to avoid burnout. It's key to kind of step outside of that and make sure you're getting the rest and recovery. And I think it's not just vacations and doing it twice a year or whatever. I think it's a daily practice. I think it's at the end of your day, stepping back and having some time to decompress and relax, because that gives your subconscious mind an opportunity to process and recombine information in a way that allows you to get novel insights and see things and understand things differently. And again, that comes back to kind of how important contemplative routines are in feeding new information into the subconscious, so that when you have these periods of rest and recovery, you can kind of recombine this information into new creative breakthroughs and insights. And that's actually, we're kind of, I don't want to talk about it too much, but we're getting into the second month. With the topic we're going to go into in the second month webinar of Science of Action is going to be creativity and how to cultivate creativity, how to create breakthrough insights. And rest and recovery is a huge component of that. And I built that into my daily architecture, which is borrowed from some of the world's top performance experts, people like Michael Gervais, people like Josh Waitzkin, and cultivating that daily ritual, that daily architecture that enables you to have time for rest and recovery, so that you can be thinking and operating at your peak.
Real quickly, I want to add to this, because we wanted a little bit about the Science of Action, the executive effectiveness aids, these kind of personal trainers for productivity that we're pairing people up with over at Science of Action. We actually train these people. Part of the methodology and our system that we train these people in actually incorporates, we call it our fifth pillar. And you'll find out about what all of those are down the road if you join Science of Action. It's really a crucial part of our process. We just call it play. It's the idea that you have to that high performers have to engage in the world in an unstructured way, do things that are just kind of naturally and intrinsically rewarding, that aren't about self-improvement in any way, shape, or form. And we actually train everyone on the accountability team to really keep an eye out for this and be a watchdog and a lifeline for their clients in this area. So it's their job to actually, after 3 weeks in a row of a client just like knocking goals out of the park, accomplishing big things, our team are actually trained to have this conversation one-on-one and say, hey, like, this week we've got this series of 3 objectives that we're going to be, focusing on. Let's dedicate one of them as a total layup. Like, let's have one of them be something that's just innately rewarding, that's going to decompress, that's going to kind of feed the fire, right? That's going to rejuvenate and bring you back fuel. We discovered this the hard way. We actually learned that we have to do this to create sustainable habits of performance. So whoever asked that question is 100% right. If you don't have this, then ultimately it's not sustainable. You can be high performing, but only for whatever your internal capacity is, a few weeks, a month or 2, maybe more if the stakes are really high, but ultimately burnout comes. And when it comes hard. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I answered some of the questions in the chat. I'm trying to kind of get to these as we wrap up and get to the last few minutes of the live stream here. Peter, I think that there's a really good question in here about the importance of having an accountability sort of partner that's a peer versus an employee, et cetera. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that status isn't necessarily the most important part of having an accountability partner. It's not that it's like a drill sergeant that you're afraid of, that they're going to yell at you and spit in your face. It could be that it's somebody who works for you. It could be a peer. The most important thing is are they objective? Do they have what it takes to provide that sort of professional arm's length accountability? And is there some kind of methodology in place where they're helping you do the other pieces that really make up the kind of the ultra performance kind of high leverage state of mind that is really what science of action is all about? So I think, first of all, if you're in an accountability vacuum, any accountability is good accountability, right? It's a spectrum, and you want to get some of it working for you, whether it's an employee or a friend or a parent, even, like, just anything. But if we talk about the pinnacle of how accountability really looks, it's when there's that methodology that's in place that applies measurement, that is that watchdog for your internal rejuvenation, for the play states that give you the fuel to actually focus and manage your kind of concentration and effectiveness. It's all of those things. And I'm kind of I really believe in this stuff because this is what I've built. This is what the aid service that's baked into science of action is all about.
And I think another component of that too is, and we go, if you're on here and you haven't listened to the episode yet, I highly recommend listening to the episode that we sort of pre-released to the audience today, because we go deeper into all of this stuff. But consistency is a huge component of this, right? We talked on the interview about how accountability buddies often don't stress test very well, right? They kind of fail when you need them the most. And having someone who consistently holds you accountable, to me, I think is probably, one of the biggest or most important factors for creating and generating meaningful accountability so that you can actually drive results in your life. And so if you can find someone who's kind of objective, who holds a mirror up to you, who creates consistency for you in your life, I think that's a really, really critical tool. And if you haven't, the episode is live on YouTube. I would definitely recommend checking that out if you're in here and you have not listened to it. Me and Peter go deep into what happens, what is the kind of accountability vacuum in today's world, why people get trapped in the learning doing gap. We talk about the three kinds of different people. We go in depth into explaining the solution for the learning doing gap, which we're kind of talking a little bit about on this episode, which is a project Peter and I are collaborating on called the Science of Action, which is designed based on not only the effective strategies that have worked for me and Peter for the last 5 years, but also the science behind what makes people actually execute, and the psychology around motivation and accountability and how we can actually drive that in our lives. I think that's tremendously important. And then once you've listened to that episode and really ingested the tremendous knowledge that Peter drops in there, I think you'll be really interested in checking out the Science of Action.
Yeah, this has been great. I think we're about to wrap it up, right, Matt?
Yeah, so we're gonna wrap it up. We're kind of getting up to our time limit, and thank you everybody for hopping on the live stream and asking these great questions. I think we really got into some meaty stuff and hopefully help kind of answer some questions that listeners had and help you guys deal with some of the problems and challenges in your lives. It's been great to have you on here, Peter, and I really appreciate everybody for coming on here and listening to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to connect with your audience. It's cool to have some live interaction. So, like Matt said, we're really excited about our collaboration, this Science of Action program, this thing that we've built. We'd love you to check it out. And the best way to do it is to just head on over to the interview that we recorded. It went live on YouTube as a pre-release for Matt's email subscribers this morning. And Matt will be publishing it like a regular podcast episode. When is that going live, Matt?
So it's going live Thursday morning when our episodes typically air. So, we pre-released it just to email subscribers, just to people who were the most kind of interested and excited and, were curious about what we were working on and what we've been emailing and talking about for the last couple of weeks. And so there's some stuff in there for those of you who haven't seen the interview yet. There's something that only the first, X number of people are able to actually participate in. And so be sure to listen to that before it goes live, because once we hit the larger audience and tens of thousands of people download it, there's not going to be as much opportunity to get involved with that. But, I would definitely recommend everybody on here is obviously on the email list, because you wouldn't have gotten the live Q&A email if you weren't. And so you should have received an email from us earlier this morning with a link to the episode. And if you haven't had a chance yet, definitely check that out. It's on. So because we're sort of doing this exclusive pre-release just for our most dedicated listeners and email subscribers, we put it on YouTube in sort of an unlisted YouTube video. So it's not available on iTunes. It's not available on the podcast app that you may normally listen to yet, because we wanted to give our subscribers and our most dedicated fans an opportunity to check the episode out before we actually shared it with our broader audience.
Nice. There's a lot of stuff to check out. It's been an honor and a real privilege to come and chat with you guys. I mean, this is great. We should definitely do this kind of thing more often.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed having everybody on here, and I think we're going to link the episode itself in the chat as well. So those of you who are here that haven't or we're looking for the link, we'll post that in the chat before we kind of close this down. But thanks everybody for participating, for joining the conversation. It was great to hear from you guys. Everywhere from Alberta to Pakistan, all over the place, and it's been really cool to be able to bring one of our guests in a way that we can actually interact live with the audience. And I really appreciate each one of you showing up and joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Thanks, Matt.